Well, I'd like to welcome everyone here to the first in our Creative Process Series discussions, and really the first of our digital offerings as part of Meany on Screen. And I'm really delighted that this is an opportunity for us to present the work of Circa and to speak with Artistic Director Yaron Lifschitz. And I'm really excited about this platform in the sense that it's going to be a part of how we present artists in the future. Creative process and talking about creative process and whatever form that takes is a pillar of what Meany Center is excited about. And I'm really thrilled also to have been able to hear Yaron speak in New York in January at the International Society for the Performing Arts Conference, and to be able to bring him into these conversations in a way that really gives us an opportunity to hear more about the background of the company and how he thinks about the work. I wanted to just mention that Circa is at the forefront of a new wave of contemporary Australian circus. They pioneer the extreme physicality and powerful moving performances that push the boundaries of the art form, really blurring the lines between movement, dance, theater, and circus. And so I'd like to welcome you here, Yaron. Thank you
Thank
for
you.
joining me.
Thank you. Pleasure.
And I'd like to just start with a question about your journey. If you could tell us a little bit about your journey and how you came to circus from the theater worlds.
Absolutely. Well, I was studying to be a historian, and there was a door on the other end of the courtyard where the history department was that more interesting and attractive human beings walked into than the one that I'd been used to. And I say that with no disrespect to my historian friends and colleagues, but it just seemed like there was more energy coming out of this, the light through the door. And I walked in there and it was called the theatre, and I fell in love with it. Despite having absolutely no experience or natural talent, I can't act, dance, sing, move, uh, anything, play an instrument. But I just loved this world where things made sense, and there was some kind of electricity in that room, and I saw humans committed. And it was also, for me, it was a perfect model of a world. Everything just made sense. So I studied theatre. I called myself theatre director brazenly and went on the path and made plays that weren't very good. I thought they were great, but they weren't. And I realized as a result that I needed to work in something that had a limited language, a limited vocabulary that I could dig deep into. So I looked at into opera and puppetry, and a job came up at a circus, contemporary circus company, one of the few in Australia at the time. And I applied, and I think for various political reasons, had nothing to do with me, I got the job. That company was called Rock and Roll Circus, and it had been an important part of the contemporary circus, the theatrical landscape in the late 80s and early 90s. But by the end of the 90s, it had fallen on hard times. It was a collective that no longer had most of its original members, and it was looking for direction and was about to be defunded. I didn't know any of this at the time. So I went along for the job and got the job, and then it got defunded and people left, and I got left carrying the can, holding the can, and that is what I'm still doing 20 something years later. Um, and then essentially, like anything, you go in there and you try and figure it out. That's pretty much what I've done. And I do feel like I'm still figuring it out every day. Every day is a school day for the last 20 or so years.
And Circa has really revolutionized the way in which we see circus and the possibilities for circus. And I know that I was just really attracted to learning more about the company when I heard about the way in which you approach and integrate classical music into the work. And can you tell us a little bit more about Circa, what drives you as a company, and sort of how you define yourselves?
Look, I think we at Circa, we say that our purpose is to ask what is possible in circus. And that's a question, not an answer. We don't ever want to find a single answer. So we work in a really quite a prodigiously kind of broad and capacious sort of framework. So at the moment, we have a show in Western Australia, Wolfgang's Magical Musical Circus, which is a young person show framed around music of Mozart. We are working on Humans 2.0 and the sort of next installment on the Humans journey, which is very much about music, and about how bodies manifest acrobatics and humanity simultaneously and keeping them moving and alive. We're also in re-rehearsal for Peep Show, which is one of our cabaret works. And we're about getting ready, preparing to open Circa, which is a new version of our Rite of Spring. I think what drives us is curiosity and hunger. I think plus a healthy dose of fear. I think in the performing arts, anyone who takes themselves for granted is probably either a lot more famous than we are, and well, well regarded, or kind of kidding themselves. Because I think relevance and impact are based on what you do now. It's very much a real-time art form. And I don't ever want people to say, oh, look, Circa was it's a really interesting company 10 years ago, but now there's others that have gone into, leapfrog them out. For me, the danger in the arts is that not that we get struck by some meteor like a weird virus or a rogue president, but actually that we fail to innovate. Our job is to kind of find the world as it is and move it to somewhat to a better place regardless. And that how we do that is unwritten because we don't know what's going to happen in real time. But having the right people around you, so we're an ensemble-based company. We work, one of my artists just turned 26 and she started working with me when she was 16. So she's been for a decade. She was the youngest we've ever taken, but she's still amazing. We working with people and trying to frame a conversation that can be rich and broad and unexpected and imaginative is part of the reason why I love doing this work. And I think it's what drives Circa. There's a group of people that come to a room and want to ask what is possible in circus.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And I loved how when you spoke to us in New York, you talked about that constant need to cross borders, to create new futures, that artists are uniquely capable and have a unique charge in doing that.
That's right. I mean, when I came to the circus, very much like when I came to the theatre, everyone seemed to know how everything had been done and should be done. Mm-hmm. There was this kind of and I missed the meeting because I didn't come from places other people came from. I was, I wasn't a theatre baby. I never hummed show tunes. I grew up in upper middle class suburbia, and I was training to be an academic. And I just kept thinking, let's just pull it apart and figure out if it actually is so. And the first thing I remember, my first day at Rock and Roll Circus, I walked into this rehearsal room. We were based at the time in an old heritage building, and it was kind of not very practical, but quite beautiful. And there was this shaft of sunlight through these big bay windows, and somebody was doing a tumble run on an old piece of acrobatic mat, which was bringing up dust as they landed, which has been caught in the motes were being caught in this kind of sunbeam. And it struck me as being profoundly beautiful and a little melancholy. Mm-hmm. And I have no idea why. And I'm really interested in the way things that happen, kind of verbs, create emotions inside us. And it's not linear and it's not rational. You can find yourself weeping at the beauty of something or smiling uncontrollably without knowing how. And I love that. And I think a lot of our work and my practice is to try and get emotions into your heart without them going via your brain. Mm-hmm. And so I think if my work works, and it does sometimes and it doesn't all the time and it doesn't for everyone, mm-hmm. I bypass a lot of your thinking, higher kind of prefrontal cortex thing, and I'm in a really direct, mucky, passionate, sexy dance with your reptilian brain. Mm-hmm. And I'm saying, let's get into that place where we can kind of juice your adrenal glands, where we mm-hmm. can take that and open up capacity, but not just leave it there. That part's really easy. Like the entertainment part in circus is like a jump scare mm-hmm. in a horror mm-hmm. film. It's just kind of what we do. Mm-hmm. We almost can't help but make it interesting mm-hmm. or exciting because people are doing cool stuff. Yeah. So the question is, how do I get that dance to increase your humanness and to increase your kind of emotional breadth and to be kind of, I think, unashamedly spiritual, to say, look, actually, when humans come together and dance and move and commune, that's the essence of it. It's part of my artistic purpose, I think, is to rescue theatre from literature. And I love literature. I've got a master's degree in creative writing. But I don't think it's where theatre's basis is. And I think it got hijacked by the literary department that said, what does it mean? And what are the themes here? And I think that's an aberration and a monstrosity.
It's so reductive. Let's talk a little bit about S. You talk about the work that we're actually showing as a feature presentation that's is been up for this week prior to this conversation being shown, and you talk about a plurality of singularities, independence, connectedness, mutuality, and this a verb, as you say, an action. And I'd love to hear a little bit about the history of creating S, the languages within it.
Yeah, look, thank you. You would never start off wanting to create a show called S. I mean, it's a difficult show to kind of even express. Well, it's sort of a letter, and it's this letter. But the more I thought about it, the more it struck me as being a really great thing. The S. I mean, it's how we make things plural in English. Not everything, of course, but most things. If I have a dog, which I do, her name is Goldberg. But if we have dogs, I don't know what all their names are. And suddenly, I'm immediately by adding a single letter, there's many more or some more of these things, and my sense of scale and proportion is different. But as you say, they were all single things made many. And that's a kind of a beautiful thing, because it's, both is many and single. Like it's dogs is just one word, but it refers to many of those things. And I love that relationship. Are we a group, or are we a group of individuals? Are we, what is that relationship between the singular and the plural? And then I got into the form of S, its shape, its symmetries, its relation, the fact that the word symmetry starts with an S and feels right that it does. I got into the idea of how do you actually make the letter, and this idea of bending a line around a point. Kind of imagine if you were trying to create it in some sort of, I don't know, metal or glass craft, which I have to say this is just utter conjecture, because I have never done anything meaningful with my hands that way. So, but I kind of imagine you'd sort of bend something around a point, and you would kind of create shape. That it's it's almost a circle that's been kind of reflected and refracted and split around itself, and that all these kinds of operations can become, have physical analogues. And what I really, again, wanted to do was to put the audience into this world where they were in that sense, that they were kind of constantly felt like they were dividing and recombining, being made plural and coming back together. And I think that on one hand, that sounds kind of intellectually robust, but it's probably much more simple than that. There is a kind of an emotional wavelength to the letter S, which is something between pretty excited and pretty fluid. And it's in this, this sort of a series of emotional hues that you want to be uplifted by, but you also want to feel sinuous and sexy and slinky and symmetrical. And there's this little kind of way in which the letter creates certain flavors, and even into, onomatopoeia and Caesarean, how many words begin, have the S sound, the sibilant sounds that, function through it. And all of these things kind of drifted through the show. And my basic methodology is to create a language, by which I mean a way of doing something physical that can be learnt and spoken. So a language might be, I want you to do something in which different parts of your body move as if they are being reflected around a single object. And that's something you can start off by doing, and it will generally, mostly when we start, look like bad dance, right? Because we're not, our training isn't dance. But once you can get it moving, you can say, well, that's cool. That looks like a contortion routine, or that looks like some high end. Could we do that up a person or up two people, or could we split that apart and recombine it? And it allows us then to take it into the painstaking business of learning how to do new acrobatics, which sadly is far slower than the business of learning how to think new thoughts.
Interesting.
It's really easy to have an idea. It's really hard to go, we're in the middle of a creation at the moment. And I spent the whole of yesterday going, I've seen it before.
Yeah.
And everyone was getting incredibly frustrated at me. But it was true. I had seen it before, and that's not what we want to put on stage.
You've said that, or written that, that the lines are reality, and thought is the point around which those lines connect. And that speaks to this idea of really tethering something that is sort of there around points of thought.
I think that's right. I mean, nobody wants, I can't think of anyone who wants to live a mindless existence. I think we all have this sense that we want to have, I'll leave, I won't I'll refrain from making any political comments, but let's assume that in our hearts, we would all like to have some kind of meaning and some kind of cognitive function around it. However, generally we start with the thought, here's an idea, and then we somehow make it manifest. My experience of working in movement, and one of my great things is through circus has been being exposed to dance and other forms of physical performance, is that when you let the movement happen and the actual thing occur, then thought generally finds a way to come in and be in contact and conversation with it, rather than being sort of dominating it or overwhelming it. And so I'm really interested. I think, I often ask, are we dancing here or are we wrestling? And I feel like the dance is a much better metaphor for the kind of the give and take and the conversation between these things. So if we think about that relationship between the thing, the physical fact, the event, and the thought, it isn't one comes first and one comes after, and there is a hierarchy. Actually, it's a constant kind of, it's a constant dance, and that's what's so beautiful about it. We might do things that are profoundly beautiful, and I think the best things that we've ever done, we've lost because we were so absorbed in the moment we were unable to even remember them or recreate them. That's not an uncommon thing. I think that's part of the process, and you try and remember it. And for me, that's very much the work has to constantly be asking questions and then forgetting that it even has any thoughts in its head.
You've also spoken about the fragility, and it something that you wrote recently reminded me of what you said about the fires in Australia when you came to New York, and the fires were raging across Australia, and you said that the fires have created these beautiful orange sunsets and sort of these aesthetic moments that were powerful images of beauty and fragility, and this idea of an awareness of a shape of reality that has its own fragility and stability and plurality, and I just pointing to what lies beyond it, and that was just a very beautiful image.
Yeah, no, look, I think that that moment of the kind of the Kantian sublime is is inside us all, and it does, I think, come from a really profound sense of our own smallness and our own kind of insignificance. There's nobody who's not stood, I think, who's not stood under a huge starry canopy and had that kind of profound sense of smallness. There's that great W.S. Merwin line where he says, looking at the stars, we experience an emptiness that is not our own. And I think that is kind of human fragility. We are a small, weak, probably not very bright species, possibly alone in a great cosmos most of which is completely unknowable and unknown and probably unknowable to us. So there's two ways to go with that information. One is to think, well, heck, no one cares. Let's go and rip every piece of fossil fuel out of the ground and dominate our fellow humans because no one cares and it's irrelevant. The other way is to say all we are united by is this kind of fragility and smallness and ultimate kind of not very impressiveness. Let's be humane and let's build a world that people are astonished that astonishes us and the rest of the universe by its love and its generosity and its connectedness. And I think, that's a pretty binary kind of choice. And I think that one of the reasons why theatre keeps getting sort of in political trouble and getting sidelined is that you have no choice in the theatre because your very presence in this space is a presence where you say, yes, I want to connect with another human being. And that has to be about sharing the things that are inside. This kind of internal conversation. When we're making Humans, I came across this quote from another one of the great American poets, Donald Hall, who said that, a poem is a human on the inside talking to a human on the inside. Mm. And I also think that's exactly what a piece of theatre is. Mm. And the talk can't be, hey, let's go and, bomb some neighboring country. The talk on the inside is the talk from the inside. It's us, it's our heart, it's the murmurs of our heart, it's the size, tiny registers of fear and intuition and connection and joy that flutter across us all the time. But we're so, clothed and shod in our own sort of self-importance, we often forget that. And I think the theatre is one of its great purposes at the moment is to remind us of that fragility.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Particularly important now. I'd like to switch to the idea and the question around approaching new work. How do you begin to create a new work, and then how do you think about music? Your relationship and connecting very serious and wonderful classical music to circus is what really captivated my attention early on, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that process.
Well, look, I don't have the benefit of making old work. So so all my stuff is new. Like the tags they put on children's toys, stuffed toys, all new material inside. Yeah. I feel like that's what we try and do. Okay. But I'm not hugely interested in recreating, and I've never felt that as a director I have the kind of imagination that would let me take, a hoary old text and sort of completely dominate it with an auteur's kind of imagination. That's not my approach. I'm much more a kind of an interrogator and like to dig fairly deep but narrow wells. So I make new work based mostly on intuition and opportunity, and again that kind of seismic flicker where you recognize a signal and you kind of think, oh, there's something there. And it should be like falling in love. You should leave an encounter with an idea or a person and think, I can't live without them, and I can't, and I can't go home and not think about them, and I've got to call them or text them. Mm-hmm. Every time you fall in love, it's the first time you've ever done it, and you're the first person who's ever done it. Mm. And there's, I think for me that making a new work, each one has to sort of feel like it's the only new work, even though I'm often working on 6 or 7 shows simultaneously in various stages of creation. That frisson needs to be original and authentic, and otherwise they don't work, and the audience snips it. A dead show made for an ulterior motive very, very quickly. Mm. Music was never. I never wanted to be the company that did circus to classical music, and we're trying not to be. But I've always thought that Western art music is possibly the only justification for white males as a kind of species. Like everything else, we're responsible for death and religion, war and religion and bombs and stuff. But there was also Bach and there was Beethoven, and this stuff, and Mahler, and this stuff was. Too, man. Oh, no, no, no. Don't get me wrong. I think that there's an extraordinary profusion now, but right back through this, there's one of the local radio stations here has been running a series on, female composers from the Baroque, and of course there's a long and strong tradition
Yeah.
of female composers. But the modes of the modes of Western tonality, the kind of the system that the things that are written are preferenced over things that are sung in and handed down by word of mouth. Like all of these things are clearly very gendered. They're very patriarchal, and they will and should and need to change. But there is an extraordinary history and a great canon and legacy, and I never understood why I would go to a rock concert like the small one behind me, and
I thought that was a Circa performance.
yeah, that's right. It's how we roll. And 55,000 people are paying a couple of $100 a ticket and having the time of their life. And then I'd go to a Mahler concert, and there would be like 1,100 people, and I'd sit up and look down and see essentially grey hair and bald, and almost all white, and a lot of people falling asleep, and going. Cultural duty is, I think, an important thing. I do think we have cultural duties, but I think that the sheer thrill of this music and the sheer sort of impact is not being reached in a concert hall format. And I need a score for everything one way or another because I don't really like words in the theatre. So we can actually get together and dance really well. Like give me this music and let me fill it with bodies. And the result is we do a Shostakovich string quartets, which might be normally seen by 200, 400, 600 people. And I played them at 2,500 seat amphitheaters and theaters, packed with people. And the audiences aren't young or old, they're both. Yeah. The audiences aren't classical musical theater, they're both a circus. And we, not everyone is going to love that experience. I mean, one of the great comments that came out of our Beethoven 9 from one of the august subscribers to the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra who commissioned the work was, I would happily see the Beethoven again and happily see Circa again, but I'm not sure I'd see them together. And I think that was great. There was somebody who went, this was somebody who I'm sure had never seen Circa before. This was in an audience that leapt to its feet at the end, a full house, and gave it a roaring standing ovation. But for them, their experience was, that's a good thing, and that's a good thing. The togetherness didn't bring me a personal moment of kind of joy and I think that's. She watched a circus for 75 minutes. She watched acrobats doing something. That was a huge, in a concert hall. That never happens. So I love the opportunity and the chance to work with this extraordinary canon. It's just, for me, Borges said that music is he described it as that mysterious form of time. And my two favorite mediums in the arts are kind of art music and video art. And I think the thing about both of them is that they need to be experienced sequentially in time. And the thing about time is that we all live with it, through it, in whatever actually it is. No one really knows what time is, but through that experience. And over the course of an hour, we're going to finish this conversation. And both you and I are going to be an hour closer to the end of the time that we have on this planet. That's a fact, as will all of our audience. And so there's this kind of moment of trying to arrest that or celebrate it or get some kind of intuition or value or pleasure out of that experience. And that for me is really deep encoded in these kinds of art forms. It's very different to TikTok. It's very different to to reading a novel where your relationship to it can be in and out of time and or a picture on a wall. These things are, I think, of highly time bound. And I think circus is very much in that same world. Our dramaturgy is very much the dramaturgy of the audience's heartbeat. One of our performance techniques is called a virtual drum roll. And we use it when we're doing really nice acrobatics, but it's becoming too sort of smooth and lovely. So we'd start doing some exercises on how you imagine the kind of traditional circus version of a drum roll, where you kind of build up and you build tension, you slow down, and then you deliver the trick and you get the end of the roll part. So we look at how that rhythmic structure can be subtly incorporated in even the smoothest of sequences, so you can hold tension back to release it. And you don't want to do that. If you do that too, obviously the audience will clap. We often don't want the audience to clap, but if you do it don't do it enough, the experience is too smooth and everyone thinks, oh yes, it's really beautiful. But without the kind of the burn, it's not really circus. It's just kind of acrobatic. It's acrobatic dance, and that's not really our medium. And that really is about a profound manipulation of time. And I think music is very much the same thing.
We were talking about the Rite of Spring earlier, and
Yeah.
how incredibly exciting and in time and complex time that piece is.
Joyously, endlessly fascinating. Every time I hear it, there's new ways of encoding time, of making it happen. And of course, it's a piece about time. I mean, it is the rite of spring. It's not the rite of some season or general rite. It's set at this point where the ice, the tundra is cracking. I also think it's one of those great pieces where it's completely phony. I mean, it's not really a real ride, and it's not really. It's kind of the show personship of Stravinsky and in the Belarus is kind of it's almost comical in some ways, and yet this piece of work that is just so absolutely extraordinary sits at the heart of it. But when you see a production, and I won't name any, but when you see a kind of straight ballet production that's sort of done in moccasins and with the orange sunset behind, and you think, oh, that's never going to wash apart from the music. The only way that will be carried is the music, and it poses a lot of real big questions right now. Like it's politically really frowned upon, and rightly so, to sacrifice virgins these days. It's just not done. So we had to think about that really carefully. What does it mean? I mean, even the Pina Bausch, which is the Urtext version for our generation, she absolutely nailed that show. But I don't think in 2020 you could get away with making a show where a woman is ceremoniously kind of dances herself to death at the end. I think that would be deeply problematic. So we went and looked at things like what actually happens at the point of sacrifice, and in a lot of the literature, things like Iphigenia, as well as of course Abraham and Isaac, the sacrificial victim disappears at the point of sacrifice. They're either they're either kind of transmuted into something else, or they just were kind of never there. You just had to kind of believe enough that there was a sacrifice was going to happen for that to have been the sacrifice. It's doubtful whether like a lot of them, anyone actually got killed. It was more that you built the possibility that they would. In a lot of cultures, particularly later versions of culture. So we use that, and now the kind of the dance to death sequence. The woman who does that leaves, and then kind of dives back with the group, and all that's left is an empty shaft of light with a little smoke in it. Because I didn't want to say this is about killing a woman or this is about spring in Russia in 1970. That's not the point. This is about this kind of very essential human energy that seems to go through all of us, that is complex. And and again, the difference between Stravinsky and a rave party is that it has the same kind of energy, but Stravinsky is not saying stop thinking, and he's not saying feel only one thought, and he's not saying this will get better with chemically altering substances. He's saying go profoundly into the nature of this experience. And that's why, I love it.
A few years ago, I was at the Edinburgh Festival and I saw Humans in a very, what seemed to me a relatively small-ish, although there were lots of people in there, but we were all packed together in this sort of circular tent or semicircular tent. And I was really struck by both the intimacy of the work and the, I would say not the fear around it, but there was a sense of, I had these fearful expectations that were really connected to the intimacy. It was can you speak to the role of intimacy in the work, and then the sort of thrilling aspect of circus, but that you are so thoughtful and spare, I think, in your treatment of?
Yeah, look, thank you. I think intimacy is a really great word. It's, in etymological terms, it comes from the Latin for inmost. And I think that, it goes to that whole idea of what are we actually offering to the audience? And I think that virtuosic kind of human stuff is jumping on each other, leaping through the air, building big towers, is the price of admission. It's the thing that kind of makes people, it's the sugar coating on the pill, right? The pill itself is profound and real connection with other human beings who are sharing things from inside them. And to do that, you have to be attuned. You have to be prepared to go inside yourself, into your kind of inmost self. One of the things that I often say to our artists is that you can only gain in the theatre what you're prepared to risk. And so if you want someone's connection, you have to offer and risk connection, which means, of course, you might get laughed at or rejected, or they might not like you. If you want to have an experience that's kind of vulnerable and open, then you have to offer these things and risk that they'll be rejected. And that's really scary. And our performers, I've watched performers do fearless things and balk at talking on a microphone, or not doing very much. I think that without wanting to sound religious about it, because I'm not, but I think that the Tao is very informative in their kind of, in its exhortation to adapt the nothing wherein is the something. And the idea that everything, the relationship between what is and what isn't is incredibly important. So when it comes to holding things back and saying this is a time where we're going to push skills at you and make you excited and get your heart aflutter and open your eyes with wonder, great. But now we're going to stop doing that, and someone's going to hold a moment, or someone's going to have an authentic human connection with another person. And these things will be powerful and electric, but only because they exist in relationship to the kind of the positive, affirmative kind of physical space. And one of the ways to think about it is think about the best acrobat in the world. They're standing on top of 5 people and they're jumping back through the air and they're landing in a handstand. There's something incredible that one person in the world can do. They are still, by any measure, an incredibly weak species. They are. There's nothing in the that a monkey couldn't do better. As I say to performers, the best aerialist in the world has got nothing on an injured pigeon, right? So it can't be our capacity that creates the wonder. It's that it's us doing that thing that creates the sense of wonder and amazement. It's not the thing itself. And so if we disconnect, if we untether that from us as humans, I think we'll end up with essentially a bunch of physics. And that can be done better by pretty much anything, certainly, So I think what makes it special and what makes it particularly relevant is its connection to humanness. And you can't just take that for granted. It's not the fact that it's a person standing there. It's that it's a human standing there who's not afraid to connect with you and not afraid to give you and to offer of themselves. And that's really hard. It takes a lot of trust, and it takes a lot of our stage and theatrical techniques are not well suited to it in the circus. Like they just they're about getting applause and getting the approbation of an audience. And actually, sometimes I often say to my artists that the zen of our work is you should be able to do the simplest thing, a forward roll or a handstand, and make the audience weep. And if you can do that, then you've kind of truly arrived. And we've never done it. I've worked with some of the best acrobats on the planet and some extraordinary performers. And still, we've got close. I felt that moment. I felt the unexpected and overwhelming emotion of a simple thing done with gravitas and intimacy. But you can't predict it. The other thing is that I think the trust and the intimacy on stage can't be faked. It has to be earned between people, exactly like in real life. And you can't get into a relationship and expect to have great outcomes by an understanding by on your first date, and we are an ensemble company, and we work together, and that creates all sorts of problems because sometimes you don't know whether you're a workplace or a team or a family, and often you're some kind of crazy mixture of all of them. But at the end of the day, without that, we wouldn't be able to do this work.
Speaking to that complexity, when I heard you first speak in New York, you talked about this verb, this relatively new verb called sondering. And I didn't even know there was a word for it, but I knew that the concept existed because it continually amazed me when I'd be driving on the freeways in the Bay Area, was when this really hit me, that every single person in a car on the freeway in this terrible traffic had a life that was as complex or perhaps more complex than my own, with all of the same challenges and interests, or different ones, but the same level. And that just blew my mind. But I didn't know there was a word for it until.
No, I didn't either. It was a fairly recent discovery for me, and it totally blew my mind because I thought, wow, and isn't it funny that we all walked around with the same experience, but we didn't yet have a word for it.
And yet this is a gift in a way, this sort of connection that is made in these moments where that somersault or that movement drives.
That's right. And I think what actually, my guess is what neurologically happens is that we bypass a lot of our thinking function. We just we go back to this kind of childlike state. And it's why, in the circus, you say, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, historically, because it's a form for the family. And that moment kind of connects your kind of adrenal system with this sort of breath and heartbeat. And it actually happens. And when that happens, I think you shut down a little bit of your kind of, the sort of posh you, the part that, wants to be, is at a cultural event or doing something, and you have this authentic experience. But it's pretty quick. And for us to get to kind of figure out how to invest that deeply in meaning and in something that can sustain a stage show. I mean, an hour on theatre is the longest hour ever. It requires so much energy and time to create something that isn't boring. And my personal life motto is, do not bore. That's the thing we have to do. We just have to, like anything else, but and I don't see, unfortunately, I see a lot of theatre that I don't think has the same motto, and I get bored very easily, and I don't want to be.
Well, I would like to close this conversation. I think this has been a fascinating conversation, and I just, with this concept of connection, and our season, when we put the season together coming up, we were really thinking about the idea of interdependence and about how the work that we were hoping to present was blurring boundaries between disciplines, was mixing the old and the new, was bringing different groups of individuals together within Meany, outside in the community, and something that you spoke in New York when I first heard you talk. You said, if we take all of our DNA and we unfurl our packets of DNA and we lay it all end to end, each of us would not reach the ceiling, but rather we'd span around the solar system twice. And that is how large we are. We span the solar system twice, each one of us. And then imagining the thicket of connections we have, the possible entanglements, the discoveries, the journeys. The world is vast and mysterious, and artists are noble guides who create the opportunity to imagine this and other worlds. We create these and other futures. And I wonder if you could just say a few words as we close the conversation around the role of the artist, the point at which we are in this world, and what you hope that art can achieve at this moment.
Look, we inhabit a particularly complex moment, And I think every artist is caught with the desire to be the purveyor of hope and legitimately worrying about the future, about the challenges that we face. But I do believe that art is essentially an activity of hope. Um, Gerhard Richter, the painter, said that art is the highest form of hope. And I think it's true. I think when you stand in front of a blank canvas or an empty stage and you say, I'm going to make a mark, and I'm going to think somebody else might be interested in that mark, and I'm going to try and communicate my experience in all of its complexity with all of my inadequacy in that space, and I'm going to invite others to be in a receptive conversation with that. You're positing a different kind of world. And I think, I think the world there's two ways to think about life, or pretty much anything. Is it a finite game or is it an infinite game? And a finite game has rules and winners and losers, and it ends. And in an infinite game, the aim is to keep playing. It's to be in the game forever, or as long as you want to be. And life is an infinite game, and art is an infinite game. And I can't, I can't be professionally more or less successful or engaged or not than I am, but I can help build a world in which myself and others get to keep doing this. And that world requires change and evolution for us on the maker side, for the audience, for you as presenters, figuring out what that future looks like. It's definitely not going to come from any one person alone. And there's not, it's not like business or advertising where there's suddenly a room of creatives and they come in and are supposed to have all the answers. We're all in this together. But in the arts, we have the privilege of spending most of our lives thinking about how to do things creatively and how to make meaning happen and how to cause connection. I think that, if I were running the world, I would be investing very heavily in my artists at this point, and I would be backing them to try and figure out some ways through this, because I think one thing that we know is that there's never been a moment in human history where people closing down communications and holding back or retarding their intellectual and creative capacities has helped anything. It just doesn't do any good. And we need, I think we need artists, and we need a lot of other people, everyone, to come on board and to say, let's just create a world where we can talk a little more and we can connect a little deeper, and we can then build on that, because it's not a finite game. There are no winners. The only winners are that we get to keep playing this game and somehow we don't blow it up or turn into murderous tribes or opposing each other, or burn the place, turn this place into an unlivable burnt shell of a planet. To do that, we're all in this together, and we want it to keep going. So I would encourage you to buy a ticket to the Meany Center if you're in Seattle, because I think that's the only legitimate form of cultural engagement that I think is it's a good start.
Yes. Well, we certainly believe in artists, and unfortunately we can't have live performances here right now, but we really look forward to having Circa here for a live performance in the near future, and having you here, and we can have this conversation in person, and hopefully that will be sooner than later. And thank you for joining me in this conversation today, and for joining us.
Thanks so much. It's been an absolute pleasure.